Hello, and welcome to the Talking Research podcast. This is the third episode in our Women in Paramedicine series. I'm Laura Hirello, a PhD student at Monash University and a member of the College Research Advisory Committee. Uh, as this is our third episode in the Women in Paramedicine series, this is our last regular episode. But in our sort of final wrap up episode, we are going to have a panel discussion with all of the guests that we've had so far in this series. So Lisa, Alicia, and then Judy, who's our guest today. If you have any questions for Judy or any of our guests in this series, we ask that you please submit your questions so that we can ask our panel. There's information below the podcast link that you probably followed to get here about where to send those questions, but you can email them to research.committee@paramedics.org. All right. So today I'm joined by Judy Sheahan to discuss her paramedicine research. Judy, thank you so much for joining us. So let's get started with having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hi, Laura, and all the listeners. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm an internationally registered paramedic and EMT. I am a qualitative researcher, and I really advocate for access to education and specifically academic career satisfaction. I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm also a mom. And I'm adding that in there because obviously being a mom alongside working is some things that I want to chat about a little bit later. So I wear many hats and I absolutely love it. I thrive on all of that. I've been in paramedicine coming up to 20 years. So next year will be 20 years. I started in 2006 in South Africa, where paramedicine is actually called Emergency Medical Services, so EMS, where initially I was vocationally trained and later on went on to obtain higher education degrees. And I practiced there in the pre-hospital setting in Cape Town and Johannesburg as what people in Australasia will probably know as an ambulance paramedic, and then later on as a critical care paramedic in primary and secondary retrieval. I did some work on HIMS and an emergency department. And I've actually now been equal years working as a clinician and an academic. So as of next year, I will officially have been an academic for longer than I was a clinician. So in the academic spaces, I have worked in a couple of countries since 2013, starting out in South Africa, then did a couple of years in the UK, in the Middle East, and currently I work at ECU in Perth, Western Australia, where I'm a lecturer in postgraduate critical care paramedicine. And I really appreciate the fact that I've had this opportunity to work internationally in the academic space because I have this unique firsthand experience of the profession in like a little bit of a global view almost. And if I look beyond sort of the logistical differences with resources and finances, then I think deeply rooted, a lot of the profession is actually facing very similar challenges, which as a researcher is actually a little bit exciting because research in paramedicine is evolving. Research specific in paramedicine, specifically for paramedicine, is awesome. So I am really appreciative of this podcast initiative because I feel that although the listeners audience might predominantly be from Australia and New Zealand, the information is paramedicine authentic, which I honestly feel is applicable to the professional worldwide.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I am also international. I'm from Canada, where I was also sort of vocationally trained as a paramedic because that's what the options were at the time in Canada,
Yeah.
and came here 2 years ago and was really worried that my experience wasn't going to translate. And I was shocked to find so many similarities, not just in the medicine, but in the culture of paramedics.
Yeah. So as a qualitative researcher, the culture obviously interests me more than sort of the clinical stuff. So yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, how long have you been in Australia for?
Just over 18 months.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So right
So,
around, yeah, I just hit my 2 year anniversary. So I'm on a
okay.
similar track.
Yeah. So fairly recent still.
Yeah. Excellent. So can you tell us a little bit more about your area of research and what you're currently working on?
So I'm a PhD candidate. So at the moment, all the research I'm doing is focused on what I'm doing in my PhD. And I'm doing an in-depth exploration of professional identity transformation in EMS or paramedicine clinicians who transition from the clinical space into the academic space. I'm doing a constructivist grounded theory study, which obviously aligns with my very deeply rooted qualitative research interests. And having a listen to the first episode in the series where Lisa chatted, she also mentioned that she did some grounded theory work. So I was like, okay, so we have there's some similarities in some of the qualitative work that's being done. Um, I think, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier as well, that paramedic specific research is really gaining momentum. And it's awesome to see that paramedics are now doing research about paramedics, where in the past we had to rely really on doctors and nurses or allied health professionals who were doing research on paramedics. But I think it's really unique that we're able to expand our paramedicine specific research repertoire. So what am I looking at in this grounded theory study? So I think the methodology is really well suited because it looks at the sort of deeply rooted, as you mentioned, cultural and like sort of how society views us as a profession. So from that, you're able to look at all these nuances specific to the paramedicine profession. So I really have an interest in how people develop their professional identity, because your professional identity obviously has a direct impact on how you are going to convey yourself and how well you're going to do your job. So yeah, so that's pretty much what it is about. I'm very deep into this qualitative space at the moment, and I'm nearing the end of my PhD journey, which I'm very excited about, but also I feel like there's going to be a very big hole in my life. I'm going to have a lot of free time. So I actually published a paper from my PhD about 2 weeks ago in the African Journal of Emergency Medicine. So feel free to go and check it out. It's titled The Evolving Role of Paramedicine Educators, and it was a scoping review.
And so have you focused mostly on sort of a specific country, or are you looking at paramedic identity internationally?
So the setting of my research is South Africa.
Yeah.
Um, and with some of the literature that is available specifically from Australia, I have seen that there are differences, but there are also so many similarities.
Yeah.
But in my studies, it's my setting specifically is South Africa because that is where I'm from.
Yeah. Interesting, because like we talk about paramedic identity, and paramedicine is one of those things where technically it's a job, it's our profession, but it's something that we identify, right? So like we say,
Mm.
I am a paramedic. And when you think about other jobs, you don't hear people who work in advertising or like marketing being like, I'm an advertiser. Um, but so many, and I think so many healthcare professions are like this, is that we sort of not get sucked into it, but certainly absolutely it forms sort of a core part of how we identify.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So it's very exciting, and I can definitely talk about it all day.
So as you've sort of been working through this PhD, so you say you're almost done. Are you doing it part-time or full-time?
I'm doing it part-time. I'm doing it
Yeah.
part-time. So I'm into my fourth year now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally understand. You start this giant PhD and you feel like you're never going to get through the work. And then when you're on the other side of that huge amount of work, you're like, oh my God, this is going to end.
I
And then what am
know.
I going to do with my
And then what am
time?
I gonna do? I know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very scary. But so as
I
you've been
will, I
working through
will,
this,
I will be sleeping. I will be sleeping. I'll
yeah.
catch up on some sleep.
As someone who has sleep as an integral part of their PhD project, I would highly recommend it. Very important. Um, so as you've been working through this PhD, what are some sort of resources, opportunities, or collaborations that you've found to be essential for your work?
Um, Collaborations, I think, has been really central to the work that I am doing. And really the colleagues who have been on the similar sort of journey, career trajectory where you start off as a clinician and then you find yourself transitioning into the academic space. And then there's that bit in the middle that's just really confusing and blurry. So that collaboration and being able to work alongside and suffer together and creating that community of practice has really been valuable in gaining the depth of trying to bring across what my experience was firstly, and then also realizing that I haven't been alone in that space. So I was fortunate in my very first academic job that I had in 2013 to 2017. I had awesome colleagues, and we were a group of people who could just honestly put the paramedic ego aside and go, I'm really struggling with this. Like, I have no idea what is expected of me right now. And even more so when you're a clinician who has, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many years experience you have, and you're good at being a clinician, and now you come into this academic space, and suddenly you're expected to do things that you were never taught. Like, you were taught how to treat people and how to interact with patients, and now you're here in the academic space, and it's like, oh, let's do curriculum development. Let's write assessment strategies. Let's write some learning outcomes. And then you're like, I don't even know what half of these words mean, but right, I'm here. I'm so experienced as a clinician. Of course, I know what I'm doing. So having people in your corner who can just honestly go, you know what, I feel you. I have these exact same feelings, and it is just okay to talk about it. So that's been really good for my development, not only as a researcher, but definitely as an academic. Opportunities. So I am very much a go-getter, and I try and advocate and encourage other people to do the same. So if you're new to academia and you're new to research, I would say just take whatever opportunities you get, even if it feels like a really small opportunity. Just put yourself out there and take the opportunity. Like, often ambulance services or universities will host little internal research days, or just like a day where you share some good practices. Like, those are the things where you need to, on that sort of small scale, just put yourself out there. And often you'll think like, oh, but I don't deserve to be on the same like program as my manager or as the professor. But of course you are. Like, you can have qualified a couple of months ago, and you could have had this very unique experience that someone who's been in the profession for 10 years, they've never had that experience. So then, irrespective of how many years or months you've been in the profession, you have something valuable to add. So I often find myself, and I do this when I give feedback to students as well, where you underscore yourself, and people must stop underscoring themselves. Like, everyone has something to add. So that's what I would say. Opportunities, like, just whenever an opportunity arises, just take the opportunity. Like, every opportunity is an opportunity where you can learn something, where something can develop, or you can just meet with someone and say something and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And next thing, that's what your PhD is about. So you need to be your own greatest cheerleader and just take whatever opportunities you can get.
I think of it as like, so, if you're working clinically and you have the opportunity to talk to a higher level clinician about a specific presentation you've seen or about something like that, they're always so happy, or most of the time they're so happy to sort of chat with you, and you learn so much. And I think research is exactly the same, right? These people have these big titles and these sort of letters behind their name, but at the end of the day, they're really interested in just talking about their work, and you just have to go up to them and ask them about it.
And ask them, exactly. So take the opportunities.
Yeah. That, and as it turns out, having someone to debrief with at the end of the day is just as important in research as it is
Yep.
in clinical.
Yep. Having an academic friend.
Yes.
An academic friend. I have lots of academic friends.
And I would also recommend for all the PhD students out there an academic group chat where you can send memes.
Just to lighten the mood a little bit.
Exactly. And so as you've gone through this journey, what are some unexpected findings or challenges that you've encountered along the way?
Um, so I mentioned earlier that I've worked in a couple of places in the world, and I have this sort of unique experience where I've seen paramedicine in a couple of different parts of the world, in low middle income countries and in high income countries. So in the context of the research that I'm doing, the challenges that I have seen the profession facing is actually quite similar. So before I like really got into the professional identity stuff, what people call you and what you call yourself is often the sort of first thing that sparks the actually, but who am I? So the inconsistency in academic terminology and just titles in general is something that has bothered me quite a bit. So I want to almost challenge the listeners to go, have they ever actually just sat down for a couple of minutes and thought about what your job title means to you? So whatever your job title is, like the job title can be defined by the institution where you work, by how many years qualified you are. So in every job, there's going to be, everyone needs to have a title. And I sometimes think that the people who decide what the titles are underestimate how impactful the title can be. So I challenge you to sit down in that uncomfortable, deeply reflective space and just think about, what does the title of your job mean to you? So irrespective of if they call you an ambulance paramedic too, because you work on an ambulance and you've got this many years experience, what does having that title actually mean to you? So if you have never actually sat down and thought about what your title means to you, then do you even know who you are as a professional? Or is your current professional identity just shaped by the qualification that you have? So I had been working in academia for about 5 years so 5 years in academia and almost 12 years in the profession. And I kind of got to this place where I had an identity crisis almost, where I was like, I don't actually know what's going on at the moment, because at that point, I had been called a basic, intermediate, and advanced paramedic, which is some of the terminology from South Africa. I'd been an emergency care practitioner, which kind of aligns with the critical care and intensive care paramedics here in Australia. I'd been an instructor, I'd been a lecturer, and at the time, I was actually a senior lecturer at a university in London. And if you look at some definitions of what an expert is, people say after 10 years, you're considered an expert. So here I am, 12 years into the profession. The books say, oh, you're an expert now. But in reality, I was sitting there going, I have no idea who I am or what I am, let alone an expert in anything. So at that time, if someone asked me what I did, I would say, I'm a paramedic. That's the default. I'm a paramedic. And then it's like, oh, that's super exciting. That's very exciting. I'm like, well, I am a paramedic, but I teach. I work at a university. And then they're like, oh, but so you're a paramedic? Yes, I'm a paramedic, but I now teach paramedics. I no longer work on an ambulance. So then it's like going backwards and trying to explain or like justify that, yes, I'm calling myself a paramedic, but I don't really feel like that's what I am. And that was like an uncomfortable space to be in. And it doesn't matter how many times you say, I teach, I'm a lecturer, I'm a senior lecturer. People just get stuck on the I'm a paramedic and they want to know, oh, but what's the worst job you've ever been to? And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, TV does make paramedicine out to be super exciting. And if you're a lecturer, it's kind of like a little bit less exciting. But why did it take me so long to actually make that switch and actually realize in myself that yes, I was trained to be a paramedic and I treated patients on a very high level for many, many years, but that is not who I am anymore. So I then went from calling myself a paramedic to actually calling myself an academic, because that is who I honestly and deeply felt who I am. So we can have a whole nother podcast about how dare I call myself a paramedic, an academic, if I do not have a PhD. Um, but in all seriousness, what actually led to me changing my identity? And for me, it was formal studies in health professions education. So it is not uncommon in health professions to be employed in academia with clinical qualifications only. And then you realize, hang on, I've been taught how to resuscitate and stop bleeding. And here I am being expected to teach, to research, be support for students, and. And I realized, like, I don't know how to do any of those things. So I then decided, well, I need to educate myself in how to do those things. So I did graduate diploma and a master's degree in health professions education. And for me, that was mind-blowing and instrumental in gaining the confidence to actually say that I am an academic. I am no longer a paramedic. I am an academic. And I think that's kind of the root of the PhD and the research that I'm doing, because if I can prevent that very confusing and uncomfortable 5-year period for anyone who is considering maybe going into academia, then you know what? That is what I would like to do. And I would then say that my PhD and my research has been a success.
It's so interesting because so I'm sure this is the case in South Africa, this is the case in Canada, and this is probably the case here because the sort of university system is so new, is that you
Mm,
can have these people who are incredibly experienced clinicians, but who have gone through a system of education that is outside of the traditional university system.
mm,
And so I remember talking to a colleague at home once who worked HEMS and it had essentially 8 years of medical education, but had zero university degrees. And he would have been a fantastic teacher, but he was like, I don't feel like I can get into that system because nobody ever taught me how to cite sources. Like nobody ever taught me how to do these like really specific niche things. And so now it seems like it's just starting to come together and we're seeing that. But
yeah.
yeah, of course you have an identity crisis as you're sort of switching between the two systems.
And just to add on what you just said about that person had all this experience and they would have been great, but because the criteria listed as what you need to come and work at an academic institution, it's so different all over the world. I mean, I was working as a senior lecturer prior to having my health professions education qualifications. And now it's 5 years later, and now I work as a lecturer. So it's different countries, same profession, but very different criteria for being a lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, professor, whatever. So, and that's hard because the world is really big, but the world is also actually really small because people are working outside of their countries where they're from. Like there's a lot of change and people go and do couple of years in other countries, but then you have these sort of foundational inconsistencies, and that's hard. Like that's really hard. Um, so I think that there's some stuff that can still be done to try and just even out and just to make it a little bit more consistent across the world.
Um, and you spoke about how, you know, you tell people you're a lecturer and they're like, I don't know what that is. But you tell people you're a paramedic and they're like, oh, paramedic, yes. Um, I would love to hear your take on this as someone who studies identity in paramedicine. Can we talk about the cool factor, which I feel like nobody talks about, but paramedicine, you're identifiable, you drive a big truck, you got lights and sirens on it, children wave at you, there's always like if you look at how we teach children from the very beginning and like the things that we introduce them to as concepts, paramedicine is like right up there really early on.
Mm.
And so it's like incredibly salient. And yeah, there's like this cool factor that I feel like nobody talks about.
And I think the cool factor is emphasized so much in society and publicly. And
Yep.
yes, of course, you don't want to be the downer all the time, but there needs to also be acknowledgement for the part of the profession that is the reality, which is the shift work and the
Yep.
long hours, and
Yep.
how not sleeping can have an impact on your health and on your
Yep.
relationship and on your family. So, yes, of course, every 18-year-old who's deciding on a potential career pathway is like, yes, of course, I want to drive a flashy big vehicle and go over red intersections. But alongside that, there needs to be just an acknowledgement for the parts of the profession that suck a little bit. And
Yep.
that's something else that I actually found in the research that I'm doing is the decision that people make, or what the catalyst for the decision is to go, I no longer want to work as a clinician and I want to go do something else, is often not their desire to be an academic or to be a researcher or to be in management. They are simply trying to escape all the negative things that come with the profession. For example, here in Australia, the reality of ambulance ramping. I mean, the profession globally has shift work and long hours and missing family gatherings and holidays, etc. So people are like, I no longer want to do that. And what other options have I got? Well, thankfully, the options are expanding because the profession is expanding. But I'd say about 10 years ago, the options were really limited. You could pretty much become the manager within the ambulance service that you were working for, or you could go into academia, and then you could maybe alongside that become a researcher. So people entering into academia, not because they want to, but because they're like, well, at least I can work from Monday to Friday and I can be off on a weekend. And that also has an impact on your identity because you're now doing something that you don't really want to do, but you know what? At least I can sleep in my own bed every night. And
Yeah.
then they
Yeah.
come into the profession or into academia going, oh, this is going to be amazing. I can sleep at night. I'm off on weekends. And then they forget that every part of the profession comes with its own challenges. And sadly, there's a lot of early career academics who go, well, you know what? I have no idea what I'm doing. No one is supporting me. I'm just expected to do all these things that I've not been trained how to do. And this sucks more than working night shift or missing Christmas holiday. So, you know what? I'm actually going to go back to that. It's like returning to an abusive relationship. And that's really sad. So again, why am I doing the research that I'm doing is because I want to give people an opportunity to make an informed decision about, is academia something I want to do? Yes or no? So that they can make that decision without having to go through the pain and suffering of this sucks. And I'm actually rather going to go back to shift work and being verbally abused by patients.
It's such an interesting framing that so many people leave sort of frontline clinical paramedicine, not because it's no longer rewarding, but because the drawbacks or the negatives that come with
Mhm.
that type of job are just no longer tolerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that as well in the shift work research, that people just will stop tolerating it after a certain point.
And then since we're talking about challenges, I mentioned earlier that I'm a mom. And
Yeah.
in keeping with the transition to academia, at some points I also transitioned from being someone who has no kids to someone who has kids. And that time for me was, maybe if I ask other people, they would say that your timing sucks, but when is ever the right time, you know? So, and as a member of the committee, of Women in Paramedicine committee, I feel like this is a space where we can actually try and have an impact and make some changes. So my son had just turned 1, and I decided, look, it's time. I'm going to do my PhD. And I started with the whatever the process is that you need to follow at the institution where you're registered. And a couple of weeks later, I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter. So now I was about 3 months into I'm going to do my PhD. I have a just over 1-year-old and I'm now pregnant. And I was faced with the decision of, am I going to carry on, or am I just going to go, well, no, I'm just going to stop now and postpone it. But when do you postpone it to? My kids they're going to be living in my house for the next at least 18 years. So am I going to postpone me doing anything for the next 18 years? And also, why am I even sitting here making that decision? Why am I going, I have to now decide not to do something because I have now entered the phase of my life where I want to have a family. So I decided to carry on. So at 8 months pregnant, I went and did my proposal presentation. And then I had a horrible miscalculation on when the ethics submission was due, for which I'm going to blame my mom brain at the time. So my daughter was, I think, 3 or 4 weeks old when I ended up submitting my ethics application. And people are looking at me going, you are absolutely mad. Why are you doing this to yourself? And I'm like, no, why am I the one that's mad? Why is there judgment being put onto me as the one that's being mad? Because I am allowed to have personal and professional fulfillment. And I think there's long-standing been this societal bias that women specifically need to, or the primary caregiver, that is not necessarily women these days, needs to put aside what they want to achieve in their career because they need to be the carer. And I think we can change that. So I am here as a living example that yes, although you're absolutely exhausted at times and it's not without its challenges, and you need people who can support you, and you need your community, and you need your family, and you need your friends, which doesn't help if you immigrate, by the way. But you make a new community, but you can do it. You can absolutely achieve professional and personal fulfillment. And it doesn't matter how old your kids are. For the first couple of months of my PhD, I had 2 kids under the age of 2. And you just need to, it just becomes a new normal, and you just adapt to a new normal. And yeah, so has it been challenging? Absolutely. Are there things that can be done to make it a little bit easier for women in carer positions who also want to advance their career? 100%.
It's interesting because I actually feel like when you're in the PhD program, often the one thing, yes, there's a ton of work and there's sort of all these drawbacks. The one thing you often have is flexibility in terms of when you're working and where you're working. And so I've heard lots of people say that actually, this is one of the not better times, but certainly a more manageable time to have a family if you're going to. Because yes, there's still a lot to do, but at least you can sort of figure out what your days are going to look like and have a lot of freedom there.
Yeah.
Excellent. So how does your research impact working paramedics today?
I think I've mentioned a couple of bits that can be useful already. So I want to give current clinicians an opportunity to make an informed decision about what they want to do in their career. So if they want to choose academia as a I want an out from the clinical space, or it's something that they've always had an interest in, then I want to create a pathway for them that is less turbulent than the pathway that I was on. So I want them to be able to reach the conclusion about, yes, academia is for me, or no, academia is not for me, without the crisis bit in the middle. And if they realize, you know what, academia is not for me, then that's great, because that has prevented someone from, being 6 months in academia going, I hate every minute of this and I'd rather go back to shift work. Like, that is a bit of discomfort that can be prevented. So I think that's probably the main thing about what I want to do, or how it would be beneficial. And then later on, I would also like to make sure that universally there's support for early career academics, because whenever you've made a change from the clinical space into academia, or the clinical space into research or management, or working in high acuity if you've used to working in low acuity, any change, there's that initial bit where you really need to be supported. And if you start a job in academia, sure, you get sent a couple of videos that you need to watch about how to access your payslip in the staff kiosk. And while all that information is super relevant, it's not going to make your day-to-day responsibilities any easier. It's not going to, and I don't want to say that everyone who's new to academia needs to have their hand held, but if they want to have their hand held, they need to have access to someone who is able to support them without going, you've been a clinician for 10 years, why don't you know how to teach? No, I don't know how to teach because I've never been taught how to teach. You're assuming that I know how to teach. So yes, something that is specific to paramedicine that can help the clinician who's become an academic honestly develop as an academic and be able to make decisions about, should I do postgraduate studies in health professions education? Should I do research? Because if I do a PhD, that's research, that's not automatically going to make me a good teacher. Because I'm doing research, I'm still not being taught anything about curriculum development and writing assessments. So yes, that is what I want to, that is where I see it having a benefit. Like, I want people to be the best teacher that they can be. And I want them to be able to be innovative in how they teach and how they do assessments. So, and putting the research out there, we're able to have paramedic things research for paramedics, not, oh, well, nurses do this and it works for them, so let's just take that. So, and I think and that is how we're going to grow the profession specifically. So, yes, so anyone who is considering academia, or they are an early career academic, like, that's really where I feel that the research I'm currently doing is going to have its biggest impact.
It's so true. You know, we have new paramedics who come out and they get a year, at least in Victoria, they get a year graduate paramedic program where they have mentors and check-ins and all of these things. But if they're lecturers, if they're researchers, they sort of get the PhD and we're like, cool, go find your funding, like go do research. And so yeah, it would be
Exactly.
great to have a better sort of structured system of support to
Mm.
really support those, early career researchers in the profession. Excellent. How do you see your work and research area evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Ooh, so there's this last bit from my PhD that I just want to talk about, but I'm not going to, because, you know, something needs to remain as the big reveal at the end.
All
So,
right.
but that is really the bit where that's going to be like the wow factor. And of course, that's going to be applicable in South Africa. because that's the setting in which my research is predominantly taking place. But I also see that being applicable to the wider paramedicine community, and even just transition in general, whether you're transitioning to management or research, there's elements of transition that is sort of general and that can be applicable wider. So I would like to continue with that sort of support in the transition period. It was quite funny. So about 2 years before I started my PhD, I pitched my idea to a university. And they said, well, this is a passion project. It's not a PhD. And obviously I was very much like, oh, okay, kick in the guts. But you know what? It's exactly what I needed, because although it took me 2 years to gain the confidence again to actually go, no, it's not a passion project. And even though I am super passionate about academic development and faculty development, like, why can I not do a PhD about it? So that was like a little personal evolution for me. And obviously I refined what I'd initially had an idea about, and now I am here where I am, nearing the end. Yay. What else do I see myself doing? When I did my master's, it was pre-COVID, and I looked at curriculum development using free open access social media resources. Being pre-COVID, social media learning was still kind of novel and exciting. Then COVID happened, and overnight social media became a university. So it kind of put a spanner in my works of wanting to continue with what learning and what benefit there is from social media and learning in like a more formal way. So I think maybe I could go back into that space a little bit, where, I mean, I'm really an advocate for access to education, and my background being from South Africa, where there's resource constraints because it's a lower middle income country and people are sort of struggling on a daily basis just for basic needs, let alone education. So if I'm able to make education accessible, and social media is a good platform for that. So I don't know, maybe there will be something in the future where this early career academic support transition is something that evolves formally via social media. I don't know. Something else I've also been an early adopter of in my current working that I'm doing, not necessarily in my research, is in generative AI. So I've formally started including generative AI in some of the assessments that I use. And I mean, again, kind of received with a bit of a, oh, are you sure you want to do this? But you know what? I don't think generative AI, like the chat GPTs and those, I don't think they're going to be going anywhere anytime soon. So they are making our lives at university quite challenging. So I think the earlier we're able to just join them, instead of trying to fight against them, find ways to incorporate them and work alongside them, the easier it's just going to be for everybody. They're not going away. I mean, I've been using it and being actively engaging in it. And if I just see the development over the last 6 to 12 months, I can't imagine what it's going to come up with or evolve into in the next 6 months. So that's something else I'm also looking into a little bit. And who knows, maybe all those things can come together in the end. Support, transition, social media, AI, you know what, we'll just put it all together. But ultimately, I would just like my research results to be accessible, and for people who traditionally would not have access to this information to just have an opportunity to get access to this information and the support.
Yeah, I love that. I think social media is so underutilized in
Mm,
all sort of science communication as a way to not just recruit but engage with the populations that we're studying and communicate results back to the people who can use them. I think it's so
yeah, yeah,
important.
for sure.
Yeah. I also love that it took you a little while to actually get your PhD project going. I too, it took me probably 8 to 10 years to find somebody who was willing to do it because I come from a country where there is no university structure. So, for
Mhm.
all of the young researchers out there who have this burning question, it might take a couple tries. And yeah, it feels like a gut punch every time a seasoned researcher is like, no, there's nothing there.
I know.
But if you stick with it, you'll find somebody who will
Just
take you on.
persevere, persevere, persevere.
Exactly. All right. And so our last question, is there anything I've missed or that you think is really important about this topic or that you want to sort of share with the audience or and leave us with?
I did want to just add a little bit about what I mentioned earlier about having an academic friend. So that's something that I would really advise anyone who is new to the research space or is going, maybe I want to do research, but I have no idea where to start. Having an academic friend, and I like the term academic friend over something like mentor, because as soon as you use the word mentor, there's this immediate like little power relationship where one person is the mentor and the other person is the mentee. Where just an academic friend, everyone's equal. Everyone is here to just share information. So find yourself an academic friend, someone who you share an interest with. And you can find social media is a great place to find academic friends. And it doesn't have to be someone who you talked with directly. As a start, it can just be someone who you follow and see how they interact with research, see what the things are that they're posting, what do they say about it. And you know what? Maybe later on you have the courage to send them a message. I had the courage to send a complete stranger who had a similar research methodology that I had an interest in, complete stranger, sent a message, and they have become really pivotal in my PhD journey. So you don't know how what you might see as the smallest and most pointless interaction, you don't know where that could lead to. So find that academic friend and just immerse yourself in the research space if that is what you want to do. And try and like scout out everything, even though you might think like, oh, quantitative research is very interesting. I love the numbers and the statistics and all of that. Or you might go, yeah, no, definitely. Qualitative is not for me, not at all. But don't make that decision too early on. Like put your feelers into all the areas where you can. And then at some point decide what is it that I really have an interest in. And then once you've made that decision, like put all your energy into that bit because you can't do everything. But in the beginning, just try a little bit of everything before you decide like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Um, so yeah, I think that's probably the leaving thought that I would have for anyone who's considering research or academia. Um, just immerse yourself in the space, find that academic friend. You can have multiple academic friends, doesn't have to just be one person. And then who knows, next thing you guys are collaborating and you meet them at a conference or you publish an article together. You never know how your involvement, like you don't know where it can lead. But if you don't put yourself out there and you don't start to take those small opportunities, then you might be limiting the like potential that just your small little interest right now can have.
Thank you so much. So this has been such a great discussion. Thank you again for joining us, Judy. As a reminder, this is our last regular episode in the Women in Paramedicine series. Our next episode will be a panel discussion with Lisa, Alicia, and Judy. So if you have any questions that you'd like to submit, you can email them to research.committee@paramedics.org.